In the blistering heat of 1353 BC, as the sun hovered like a molten disk above the Nile's slow, moving waters, the palace of Akhenaten buzzed with a tension that had little to do with politics or war. Inside its columned halls, behind carved images of falcons and sun discs, a secret tradition was unfolding, one that stretched back centuries and would soon shape the fate of Egypt's most iconic royal family. This was the moment when the belief in divine blood, untainted and sacred, collided violently with human biology. The ancient Egyptians believed their rulers were not merely kings but living gods, children of the sun deity Ra, and thus bound by a rule that became both a privilege and a curse. Royal blood must remain pure. And purity, in Egypt's throne rooms, often meant one thing: marrying one's own kin. Long before Akhenaten and Nefertiti reshaped Egypt's religious landscape, the seeds of this genetic catastrophe had been planted by the earliest pharaohs of the Old Kingdom. Marriage between siblings or half. Siblings was not a scandal but a divine expectation, mirroring the myths of the gods themselves. Osiris married Isis. Seth married Nephthys. If gods chose their siblings as partners, the pharaoh, who was believed to be their earthly descendant, was obligated to follow that example. The royal family became a closed loop, resisting dilution by outsiders. To them, inheritance was not simply about political continuity. It was a sacred lineage, a bloodline that could never be touched by a commoner. In practice, however, this divine purity came with deadly consequences. Generations of sibling unions, brother marrying sister, father marrying daughter, mother marrying son, began to create invisible fractures within Egypt's royal families. These cracks didn't appear on palace walls or etched stone reliefs. They manifested in bones, muscles, skulls, immune systems, and the quiet suffering that echoed behind the gold-plated masks of rulers who appeared powerful but were often physically fragile. Nowhere would this be more devastating than in the family of Akhenaten***, the so-called heretic king, whose attempt to revolutionize Egyptian religion coincided with one of the most tragic genetic legacies in world history. Akhenaten's family was a product of centuries of inbreeding, but his reign would bring these genetic issues into sharp, painful focus. His elongated skull, feminized body shape, protruding belly, and narrow limbs had long puzzled historians. Some suggested he suffered from Marfan syndrome, Froehlich's syndrome, or other rare hormonal conditions. But modern genetic research points instead to a simpler, more tragic explanation. Repeated inbreeding had taken its toll, creating physical anomalies that ancient artists tried to honor, hide, or reinterpret as religious symbolism. Yet the greatest symbol of Egypt's royal genetic disaster was not Akhenaten himself, but his famous son, the boy who ascended the throne at 9 years old and would die before reaching 20. Tutankhamun***, the golden pharaoh whose treasures stunned the world in 1922, was the product of an astonishingly close genetic union. DNA studies performed in the 21st century confirmed a revelation that shocked global audiences. King Tut's mother and father were not merely relatives. They were full siblings. This was the darkest legacy of Egypt's obsession with divine blood. But to understand how Egypt arrived at such an extreme, we must trace the political, religious, and cultural foundations that shaped the royal family's marriage customs. The practice of sibling marriage did not begin with Akhenaten. It had existed for centuries across the dynasties, from the 4th dynasty builders of the pyramids to the house of Thutmose. Each generation built upon the belief that marrying a sister or daughter reinforced the legitimacy of the throne, an important defense in a kingdom where conspiracies, rival lineages, and foreign threats were constant. A royal woman married to a non-royal man could produce a child with questionable succession rights, but a royal woman married to her own brother ensured the child's claim to divinity. By the time of the 18th dynasty, This system had become deeply ingrained. Royal women such as Ahmose Nefertari, Hatshepsut, and later Ti wielded enormous power, not because of their marriages, but because their bloodline was considered sacred. This elevated status created a paradox. While common families understood the dangers of close kinship, the royal family embraced it. Political convenience and divine ideology overshadowed the biological consequences. The palace environment only magnified this. Royal children lived isolated lives, surrounded by servants and governed by strict social boundaries that prevented them from mixing with outsiders. Their playmates were often their siblings. Their companions were their cousins. Their future spouses were usually chosen from within that same limited circle. Mothers and daughters shared tutors. Fathers and sons shared priestly expectations. In many dynasties, the number of suitable royal partners was shockingly small, and over time, that closed circle tightened to an almost suffocating degree. Akhenaten's reign marked the breaking point. When he declared the sun, Akhenaten, as the sole deity, he not only fractured Egyptian religion, but also placed immense strain on the royal family. His relocation of the capital to Akhenaten isolated his household from the traditional priesthood, further shrinking the pool of potential royal spouses. In this new, experimental city, the royal family became an even more insular unit, and the consequences would reverberate through their children. King Tut's body would later reveal the price of this isolation. CT scans and DNA testing showed a list of health issues: a clubfoot, malformed bones, a compromised immune system, and a cleft palate. He walked with a cane. He endured chronic pain. He died young, and while injuries or infections may have claimed his life, the deeper truth is clear. Tutankhamun inherited a body weakened by centuries of closed, circle marriages. But Egypt's inbreeding crisis had greater consequences than one tragic young king. It destabilized succession across multiple dynasties. Inbred heirs often died young, leaving power vacuums. Rival families seized control. Foreign powers exploited instability. In the long arc of Egypt's history, royal inbreeding weakened the resilience of kingship itself, creating a fragile monarchy vulnerable to collapse. To understand the full scope of this disaster, we must explore how the tradition began, why it persisted, what political forces sustained it, and how its consequences shaped Egypt's downfall. Those answers lie not only in hieroglyphs and temple walls, but in genetic studies, medical examinations, and the silent testimony of royal mummies. This is the story of Egypt's divine bloodline, its rise, its corruption, and its tragic unraveling. When the year 1479 BC dawned over the golden sands of Thebes, few could imagine that the newborn 18th dynasty, freshly victorious and basking in its restored power, carried within it a silent enemy more dangerous than any invading army. This enemy had no armies, no chariots, and no ambitions of conquest. It traveled through bloodlines inherited quietly, passed from mother to son, father to daughter, generation after generation. It was inbreeding, hidden behind the grandeur of crowns and the brilliance of gold, but eroding Egypt's royal families from within, and it was about to intensify like never before. Egypt's powerful 18th dynasty was built on warrior kings like Ahmose I and Thutmose III, rulers who expanded Egypt into an empire. But behind their victories was a tradition that had grown increasingly rigid. Royal blood must not mix with the ordinary. Marriages between siblings had occurred earlier in history, but the 18th dynasty transformed it into a widespread political strategy. Royal women like Ahmose Nefertari, Sishaya, Mutemoya, and Queen Ti were more than queens. They were symbols of divine legitimacy. Their bloodlines carried the right to rule, so keeping those bloodlines pure became a dangerous obsession. By the time Amenhotep III came to power, Egypt was at the height of its wealth and influence. Foreign kingdoms, from Babylon to Mitanni, sent daughters in hopes of forming alliances through marriage, but the pharaoh famously refused to marry foreign princesses. No daughter of a foreign king shall ever be wife to the king of Egypt. He declared in a decision that would ripple through generations. This single policy shrank the royal marriage pool dramatically. When the king refused diplomatic marriages, the only remaining candidates were his own relatives. This decision would change Egypt forever. In the courts of Amenhotep III, the belief in divine blood strengthened to near-religious extremism. Marriage between the king and his own daughter became acceptable. Marriages between siblings became normalized. Royal women shared not only titles and chambers, but sometimes husbands, creating an intricate web of relationships that centered on one idea: royal purity equals royal power. But the consequences were already emerging. Archaeological evidence from this period shows unusual skeletal deformities in members of the royal family. Enlarged craniums, elongated skulls, narrow faces, and fragile limbs appear in the art of the time, not always as stylization, but as reflections of reality. The human cost of inbreeding, though invisible in official inscriptions, was becoming harder to hide. When Amenhotep III married his own daughter Sitamun, Egypt witnessed a turning point. Instead of seeing the union as shocking, the royal court accepted it as divine necessity. When his son Amenhotep IV later, known as Akhenaten, was born, he inherited not only the throne, but the accumulated genetic vulnerabilities of centuries of closely related marriages. Akhenaten, upon taking power, brought Egypt into one of its most radical eras. But while historians often focus on his religious revolution, the shift from Amun's massive priesthood to Aten's monotheistic worship, they sometimes overlook a deeper truth. His revolution was carried out by a family already struggling under the burden of biological weakness. Akhenaten's physical appearance, once dismissed as artistic exaggeration, has now been re-examined through the lens of genetics. His misshapen body, narrow limbs, exaggerated hips, elongated skull, and unusual facial features may have been real. While modern researchers still debate which condition might have afflicted him, they agree on one point: whatever Akhenaten suffered from, it was worsened, if not caused, by extensive inbreeding. But the crisis reached its peak when Akhenaten had children with a woman whose identity remained mysterious for decades, until modern science revealed the truth. DNA tests on mummies discovered in the Valley of the Kings revealed a shocking and tragic detail. The mother of King Tutankhamun was not Nefertiti. She was Akhenaten's full sister, a woman known only as the Younger Lady. Her bones show signs of congenital defects that mirror those found in her famous son. This union between full siblings represented the most extreme form of inbreeding in Egyptian royal history. Tutankhamun, the golden child destined to be king, never stood a chance. As a boy, he walked with canes. His bones were brittle and fragile. CT scans reveal necrosis in his foot, damage in his spine, and a compromised immune system. Unlike the romanticized image created by his treasures, the real Tutankhamun lived a life of quiet suffering. The royal artists hid his deformities beneath ceremonial depictions, but the truth lay beneath the wrappings. Tutankhamun's ailments were not accidents. They were inherited consequences of an ideology that prized divine purity over biological reality. But Egypt's royal genetic crisis did not end with Tut. The collapse of Akhenaten's religious revolution, the sudden deaths in the royal family, and the instability of succession all point toward a dynasty weakened from within. Egypt needed strong heirs to maintain political dominance, but inbred heirs often came with physical weaknesses, shortened lifespans, or infertility. This caused rapid turnover in rulers and opened the door for ambitious generals and court officials to seize the throne. Horemheb I, and later the Ramessides rose to power partly because the bloodline of the original 18th dynasty was decaying. In a kingdom where divine lineage mattered more than anything, the weakening of that lineage created a political vacuum. The military filled it. Priests filled it. Foreign powers took advantage of it. The effects of royal inbreeding even extended beyond Egypt. Neighboring kingdoms, noticing the declining health of Egypt's rulers, began to question diplomatic marriages, alliances, and military dependence. Foreign envoys wrote in the Amarna letters about internal instability in Egypt. One ruler of Mitanni even scolded Akhenaten, warning him that neglecting political alliances would have severe consequences. It did. By the end of the 18th dynasty, Egypt's grip on its empire had slipped. Territory in Syria and Palestine was lost. Foreign vassals revolted. The Hittites grew stronger. While it would be simplistic to say inbreeding alone toppled the empire, it undeniably weakened Egypt's ability to handle crises. A strong dynasty needs strong heirs. Egypt's inbred royal families produced heirs who were frail, short-lived, or incapable of ruling. This lack of stable succession devastated the kingdom, but beyond political turmoil, the most haunting legacy of Egypt's royal inbreeding lies in the mummies themselves. CT scans reveal cleft palates, malformed vertebrae, elongated skulls, club feet, bone degeneration, and signs of developmental disorders. These are physical testimonies of a system that prioritized ideology over biology. As we move deeper into this story, we will uncover how this genetic decline accelerated, how Tutankhamun's death unmasked the truth, and how later dynasties tried, unsuccessfully, to break free from the curse of divine purity. The unraveling had begun. The collapse was inevitable. On a cold morning in the winter of 1235, deep inside the stone corridors of the Holy Roman Empire's imperial palace, a young noblewoman stood trembling while a council of matrons, midwives, and clerics prepared to determine what would decide her future. Her name was Isabella of England, and before she could become queen, before she could be crowned, before she could even stand beside Emperor Frederick Roman II as his wife, she had to endure something that no woman should ever have faced. A ritual invasive and humiliating, disguised as a matter of political necessity. It was called the virginity test, a cruel procedure used throughout medieval Europe on princesses who were to marry kings, emperors, or powerful nobles. To understand why a royal bride would be subjected to such an ordeal, one must understand the obsession medieval rulers had with hereditary purity. Dynastic succession was everything. A king's heir determined alliances, kingdoms, inheritances, wars, and the future stability of their realm. If there was even a suspicion that a queen had been intimate with someone before marriage, doubts could be cast over the legitimacy of her future children. In a world where power was fragile and often violently contested, even a whisper could lead to civil war. This pressure fell entirely on the young women who were traded between kingdoms as political assets. They were daughters of kings, raised in luxury yet denied any personal agency. Their bodies became political fields where powerful men fought invisible battles. Kings demanded proof that their chosen queen was untouched. Courtiers demanded assurance that alliances would not be corrupted. The church demanded moral purity, and so medieval Europe invented a horrifying system. Virginity tests were not medical, they were symbolic acts conducted by noblewomen, abbesses, midwives, or sometimes palace physicians. Some tests involved physical inspection. Others required invasive probing. Some relied on dubious folklore, such as believing a woman would wince when touched if she were still pure. In many kingdoms, especially in France, England, and the Holy Roman Empire, these tests were standard practice before a royal wedding. The story of Isabella of England, daughter of King John of England and sister of Henry Roman III, is one of the most documented examples, when she was sent to marry Frederick Roman II in 1235. She was only 12 years old. She arrived in Cologne, where Frederick prepared a wedding that would strengthen his ties to the English crown. But before the ceremony, he insisted that Isabella undergo a test of purity. The chroniclers record that noblewomen examined her in private chambers. Isabella was humiliated, terrified, and far from home. She had no mother to comfort her, no protector from the English side, no escape. The test was performed to confirm what Frederick Roman II publicly declared after her examination, that she was untouched, pure, and suitable to become empress. This practice was not unique to Isabella. Centuries earlier, in the court of Charlemagne and his successors, Frankish and German princesses were subject to similar scrutiny. Chroniclers from the 10th century describe how queens were sometimes inspected by abbesses, who vouched before bishops and kings that the bride was chaste. In Spain, during the reign of Alfonso X in the 13th century, the court had strict protocols requiring noble girls destined for royal marriages to be examined by court physicians under supervision. In France, the Capetian dynasty was known for requiring the testimony of highborn women who would physically examine the bride. The tests were not confined to Western Europe. In the Byzantine Empire, ritual examinations were conducted on imperial brides before the emperor accepted them. The court arranged states, sponsored beauty contests known as bride shows, and although these focused on appearance, the final selection still involved examinations performed by palace eunuchs and noble women. These tests were less invasive than some Western versions, but still rested on the same belief that a woman's worth and political value were tied to her sexual purity. Medieval science offered no real understanding of anatomy. Many believed the hymen was a barrier that always ruptured during intercourse, and that an intact hymen meant purity. Others relied on legends, such as placing a raw egg inside the body to see if it would crack, or believing that a pure girl's urine would appear clear rather than cloudy. Some tests were psychological. Examiners watched how nervous the girl seemed. They observed her reactions when asked intimate questions. These interpretations were unreliable, biased, and deeply harmful. What made these rituals even more horrific was the intense political pressure behind them. A single accusation that a princess had lost her virginity could destroy her marriage prospects, end alliances, and spark diplomatic crises. Princess Constance of Sicily, who married Emperor Henry VI, was slandered by Italian nobles who claimed she was not pure. Her reputation became a political tool used by enemies of the emperor. Queen Joan of Navarre faced similar suspicions. Even Isabella of France, the wife of Edward Roman II of England, suffered rumors that clergy questioned her chastity to weaken her political influence. For queens, failing a virginity test was equivalent to political death. They could be banished, disgraced, or forced into a convent. Some were returned to their families in shame. Others were abandoned by kings who sought new brides. A woman's political value was linked entirely to her perceived purity. Men, meanwhile, were never tested, never questioned, never shamed. Behind these tests was a structure of power controlled by men yet enforced by women. Older noble women, abbesses, and midwives were responsible for performing the examinations. Some believed in the rituals. Others despised them but had no power to refuse. Many felt sympathy for the young brides they inspected, knowing how terrifying the experience was. Still, they carried out the procedures because refusing would be seen as obstruction or even treason. These virginity tests reveal the darker reality of medieval royal marriages. They show how royal women were stripped of autonomy, judged not by their intelligence, morality, or ability to rule, but by their bodies. They were political instruments valued only for the sons they could produce. Yet despite the cruelty of these rituals, queens throughout history often rose above them. Isabella of England became a respected empress. Constance of Sicily ruled during her husband's absences. Blanche of Castile served as regent of France and one of the most powerful women in European history. Many queens turned the humiliation they faced into determination, shaping the destiny of their kingdoms. Still, the virginity tests remain a chilling reminder of how medieval societies viewed women. The tests were not medical but symbolic. They demonstrated control, ownership, and political power over female bodies. They shaped marriages, dynasties, and the fate of nations. Thus begins the story of this disturbing practice, its origins, its victims, and the queens who endured it. The year was 1328, and inside the dim corridors of the French royal palace at Vincennes, torches flickered as a small procession of noblewomen entered a heavily guarded chamber. Behind these doors, in a room that smelled faintly of incense and cold stone, sat a young princess who would soon marry the new king of France. She was Blanche of Burgundy's niece, and her fate depended entirely on what these women declared. Outside, priests prayed, courtiers whispered, ambassadors watched closely. A failed examination could break alliances, a successful one could secure peace, but inside the room it was only a frightened girl surrounded by powerful strangers who believed they had a right to judge her purity. Virginity tests in medieval Europe were not standardized. They changed based on region, court customs, church influence, and political pressure. Yet nearly all followed the same structure. An inspection team was appointed. This team usually included experienced noblewomen, abbesses, midwives, or physicians. They were selected not for medical expertise, but for their reputation, social standing, and supposed moral authority. Pure women, it was believed, could detect purity in others. The room in which the examination took place was prepared with near ceremonial care. Curtains were drawn, windows were covered, guards ensured that no men were present. The atmosphere was deliberately solemn, as if the participants were engaging in a sacred ritual. For the girl being examined, this atmosphere only intensified her fear. She understood what was at stake. She also knew she had no way to control the outcome. The examination typically began with questioning. The examiners asked the girl about her upbringing, her daily activities, her interactions with other men at court. Even innocent conversations could be interpreted suspiciously. A young princess who enjoyed riding, hunting, or dancing could be accused of engaging in improper behavior. Any sign of discomfort or hesitation was taken as possible guilt. These questions were not designed to understand her life, but to observe her reactions. Medieval society believed that truth could be detected through fear. After questioning came the physical inspection. In many royal courts, this inspection focused on the hymen, though medieval examiners had very little anatomical understanding of how this part of the body worked. They believed it should always remain intact unless penetrated. They did not know that hymens vary widely in shape, flexibility, and appearance, and that some women are born without one entirely. They also did not know that physical activity, horseback riding, dancing, or even certain medical conditions could affect the hymen's appearance. Because of this lack of knowledge, many examinations were inaccurate or arbitrary. Examiners looked for signs they barely understood. Occasionally they looked for supposed tightness, which they believed indicated virginity. Some placed their fingers inside the body, others stretched the skin to look for tears. Midwives were sometimes instructed to report whether the girl reacted modestly, which was interpreted as a sign of innocence. If she flinched, looked away, or cried, they saw this as proof she was overwhelmed by the shame of being examined, a sign of purity. If she appeared calm, they interpreted it as evidence she was accustomed to intimacy. The humiliation was deliberate. The test was never simply about verifying virginity. It was about demonstrating the complete vulnerability of the girl to the political machine she was entering. A royal bride was expected to obey, to submit, to sacrifice her comfort and dignity for the sake of the kingdom. The test was her initiation. In some courts, especially in parts of Germany and Italy, virginity examinations were more ritualistic. Examiners placed symbolic objects near the bride, such as crosses, candles, or holy relics. They believed these objects would reveal divine truth. If the girl trembled near the cross, they claimed it indicated guilt. If she remained still, they proclaimed she was pure. These practices blurred the line between superstition and politics. One of the most tragic cases recorded by medieval chroniclers is that of the Polish Princess Jadwiga of Kalisz. In the early 14th century, as she prepared to marry Duke Henry of Silesia, rumors spread that she had been seen alone with a young knight. Her political enemies seized the chance to weaken her marriage alliance. They demanded she undergo a virginity test. Jadwiga protested, but her objections were dismissed. Her mother was not allowed to accompany her. In a stark stone chamber lit by a single oil lamp, midwives examined her. Despite declaring her pure, the rumors persisted. Her marriage suffered. Her reputation never fully recovered. Some virginity tests had violent consequences. In Castile, during the reign of Alfonso Roman XI, a young noblewoman was examined before her marriage to a high official. The examiners incorrectly concluded she was not a virgin. Enraged, her husband to be rejected her publicly, she was forced into a convent where she died 2 years later. Chroniclers suggest she may have taken her own life. Yet perhaps the most politically devastating case was that of Margaret of Scotland, who married King Eric Roman II of Norway in 181. Although her examination reportedly declared her pure, rival factions at the Norwegian court accused her of prior relations with a Scottish noble. These accusations did not destroy her immediately, but they returned years later when her daughter, Margaret the Maid of Norway, became heir to the Scottish throne. English and Scottish nobles resurrected the old rumors to question Margaret's legitimacy. The virginity test that was supposed to protect Margaret's reputation had not saved her from political attacks. In medieval France, virginity tests were sometimes conducted before the wedding night, and again afterward if political factions doubted the bride's purity. Chroniclers describe cases where sheets were displayed to the court to provide proof of consummation. If the sheets lacked blood, the bride could be accused of deception. These beliefs were based on myth rather than biological fact, yet they influenced royal marriages across Europe. The tests were doubly cruel because they judged women for something they could not control. Many pure brides failed examinations. Many who were not pure passed them. The results depended more on the political climate, the biases of examiners, and the ambitions of powerful families than on any physical evidence. These examinations were not always conducted by hostile examiners. Some midwives tried to protect frightened girls. They reported what they knew the court wanted to hear, aware that telling the truth could end a young bride's life. Such midwives played a delicate balancing act. They tried to spare the girl while avoiding punishment themselves. In the Byzantine Empire, the examinations conducted during bride shows were less invasive but equally humiliating. Eunuchs and noblewomen examined the girl's body for signs of what they called purity and health. They inspected her skin, hair, posture, and demeanor. They questioned her about her habits. Although they did not search specifically for the hymen, the purpose was the same, to confirm she was untouched and suitable for the emperor. These tests shaped marriage alliances, influenced wars, and altered the destinies of kingdoms. A failed examination could prevent a union between two powerful realms. It could shift alliances, provoke rebellions, or even change succession lines. Men in medieval Europe built their political ambitions on the bodies of young women who had no say in the matter. The virginity tests reveal a world where queens were not just rulers or symbols of dynastic power, but objects scrutinized, judged, and controlled. They highlight the imbalance of power. Kings were allowed mistresses, scandals, and illegitimate children. Queens were not allowed even rumors. For medieval queens, the chamber of examination was the true threshold of power. If they emerged declared pure, they stepped into a future where they would influence courts and dynasties. If they failed, their lives could be destroyed before their reign even began. And yet, despite enduring humiliation, many queens emerged stronger. Some used their positions to advocate for justice, patronize learning, and guide kings. But the memories of their examinations remained, unspoken scars of a system that valued their purity more than their humanity,